Part 2 of Thunder Bay, A Time to Remember.
The towns prospered and quarreled. They grew and quarreled. They played together and quarreled. They became the very best of enemies. And if, sometimes, they felt they had been forgotten or were ignored by the rest of Canada, well, they knew how to amuse themselves. The Port Arthur merchants decided to honor Queen Victoria's 60th year of sovereignty with a big parade. Fort William couldn't allow itself to be outdone, so it arranged to have the steamship Christopher Columbus arrive on the same date at the very same time. Fort William's plans went awry when the steamship crashed into a piggery on the banks of the Cam. But the scheme aroused the anger of Port Arthur residents. They canceled the scheduled championship lacrosse game between the Algonquins and the Kaministiquois. In 1882, for the first time, Port Arthur challenged Fort William to a hockey tournament. Fort William won 4 straight games, and the rivalry in sports between the two towns was underway. Those were exciting times at Thunder Bay, those early years before the century turned. Settlers gathered at the lakehead from all over the British Isles and Europe. First, the Scots, the McGillivrys, the McVickers, the McKellars and McTaggs, following hard on the heels of Lord Selkirk. There were Englishmen and Irish, prospectors, miners and merchants. Ukrainians pursuing the railroad to the wheat fields of the West. Italians who could build a breakwater or a highway. Finns and Swedes and Danes who knew the forests and could harvest them. Germans and Poles, Croatians, Latvians and Lithuanians. They came from everywhere, and they stopped here, where the frontier challenged their visions and tested their determination. Those were exciting times. There were caribou to be hunted, but not a moose in the entire region. And just after Custer's massacre at the Little Bighorn, a strange band of 200 Indians camped on the outskirts of Fort William. They remained for a few days, then left, and the mystery of their coming and going, their possible connection with the massacre, held the attention of local citizens for many a day. The other Indians remained, the original residents of Thunder Bay. They remained to wonder at the sprawling, brawling settlements that were gradually spreading around the Cape. South Water Street was known as the Roaring Forties, and people bragged that there were more saloons to the square yard than in any town of its size in Canada. There were singing saloons that served music with your beer. Saloons with pianos, saloons with fiddlers, concertinas, harps, and horns. Saloons where girls served beer. Saloons where colored folk could listen to a Negro ballad singer accompanied on a church organ. Those were the wet years, and they were the creative years. If people had a thirst for good liquor, they thirsted for progress as well. In 1885, electric lights flashed on in Port Arthur, the first west of the Great Lakes. Bell Telephone was operating a 50-line telephone switchboard in Port Arthur way back in 1884. And in 1892, the settlement on the hill became the first town on the continent to build and own an electric street railway. And yes, there were disasters, fires and deadly diseases, epidemics of diphtheria and cholera and smallpox. The people fought and survived. The towns thrived. Sibley and Trowbridge and Cross chipped millions of dollars out of Silver Islet in those days when butter was 20 cents a pound, eggs sold for 30 cents a dozen, and whiskey for 40 cents a gallon. Yes, and beef, a pound of beef cost 10 cents. But then a carpenter earned $1.50 a day, a farmhand $13 a month, and teachers, if they were lucky, were paid $400 a year. Silver came harder to some than to others. By the end of the century, the towns were no longer insignificant settlements. George Clavitt was mayor when Port Arthur became a city in 1906. James Murphy presided over the incorporation of Fort William in 1907. In 1910, a dry dock that was 750 feet in length, the largest on the Great Lakes, was constructed in Port Arthur by the Western Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company. The president of the company was a man whose name was to become synonymous at the lakehead with the word progress, James Whalen. The Ojibways watched and waited. They watched while buildings grew taller and taller, while paper mills were built, while white men drove horseless carriages, while Edward C. Peterson made the first flight over the lakehead. They watched the white magic of the 20th century begin to blossom, and they waited for the next marvel to appear. One stormy night, they saw a fiery eagle spread its wings protectively over the sleeping Nana Bijou, and they knew what to expect. 1914, with a roll of drums and a crash of trumpets, there was war. The 28th, 52nd, 96th, and 144th Battalions marched from Thunder Bay to the troop trains and the ships, to the bloody battlefields of Europe. Many never returned. Ships were built for the French Navy, ships that sank in stormy Lake Superior. There were medals and citations for the soldiers in the field, while at home, citizens of the lakehead rolled bandages and held victory loan rallies. In 1917, Port Arthur raised $500,000 for the war effort. The Great War provided an opportunity for Port Arthur and Fort William to prove what none of their citizens ever really doubted. When pitted against one another in continuous rivalry, they were an excellent match. When allied for a common cause, they were an unbeatable combination.
Stay tuned for part 3.